Near the Clone Wars Inn, Ahsoka Tano would carry 2 lightsabers, a standard green lightsaber and a yellow Shoto lightsaber. Initially, she was a practitioner of Form 5 Xi'an, notably the reverse grip variant of the form. Xi'an was a lightsaber form dedicated to blast deflection, redirecting one's blaster bolts back at the caster. This would be particularly beneficial to Tano during the Clone Wars, as most of her opponents were blaster-wielding droids. With the insistence of her master Anakin Skywalker, she would begin training in Form 5 Jim So with a standard grip. Jim So held the same principles as Xi'an, but instead of deflecting blaster bolts, it was dedicated to deflecting lightsabers. Skywalker would also have her dabble in the principles of Niman, though that never seemed to stick. Even with her master's training, it would seem that Ahsoka would take a different route in her lightsaber training. Ahsoka's main focus of lightsaber combat would be in Form 4 Ataru, also known as the Aggression form. Ataru was originally designed to overhaul the weaknesses of Form 3 Surisu, that weakness being that Surisu had no offense at all. Ataru was highly effective against single opponents, though its use was dubious for long stretches of time, and it needed open space to be used properly. Form 4 practitioners were also very adept at outflanking their opponents through superior speed and mobility, often striking their opponents from the back. But what was most effective about an Ataru specialist was their ability to utilize their entire body as a weapon. Not only were their blades a weapon, but also their feet and fists. This would be no different for Tano, who would highlight her lightsaber sequences with a kick or a punch. Ahsoka would also extend her proficiency with Ataru to her specific training in Jar Kai. Jar Kai was based in dual blade fencing. It was utilized mostly with Ataru and Niman, but it could be applied to pretty much any other form of lightsaber combat. When it came to combat speed, the Jar Kai variant of Ataru was nearly unmatched, especially since Tano used a Shoto. A Shoto was a much shorter lightsaber blade, usually used for defense or quick slashes. However, dual blade fencing had gaping weaknesses. Two-handed strength attacks were impossible with the form, and it was difficult to defend against power blows. What's more, users of Jar Kai were often too focused on lightsaber combat rather than their other abilities like their use of the Force, and many dual blade duelists would become overwhelmed when disarmed of their second blade. This will be no different for Ahsoka Tano, who will become too reliant on her second weapon. Nevertheless, Ahsoka still had the ability to defend herself when she found herself without a lightsaber in hand. Tano was proficient in hand-to-hand combat, though no specific source states which type. But from logical deduction, we can infer her hand-to-hand training stemmed from her practice of Ataru. As the padawan of one of the Jedi Order's best duelists, Ahsoka would be a challenge for most of her adversaries during the Clone Wars. Xanatos would carry a very standard lightsaber of the time. As a Jedi, he would use a blue crystal as the focusing lens for his lightsaber, but when he turned to the dark side, he would swap it out for a synthesized red crystal he molded himself. During his time as a Jedi Padawan prospect, he was a prodigy of the blade, top of his class, unmatched by any of his peers. It was this skill that would draw the attention of his future master, Qui-Gon Jinn. Like Ahsoka, Xanatos would be a practitioner of Ataru with some knowledge of his Jar Kai variant. It is likely Xanatos was taught Ataru from his former master Qui-Gon Jinn, who himself favored the form. He also seemed great at blaster deflection, indicating he was proficient in Xi'an as well. This may also extend to some knowledge of Jim So, as his lightsaber blows were strong enough to send shockwaves through Qui-Gon's arms. But most of all, I believe Xanatos was a practitioner of Form 2 Makashi. Makashi was one of the older forms of lightsaber combat, but to me, it was one of the most effective for the weapon type. It employed the principles of fencing, back and forth stabs and lunges. Its main focus was to outmaneuver an opponent through death spear strikes, rather than hefty cleaves. When Xanatos fought Qui-Gon Jinn for the first time in years, his former master noted that Xanatos fought with economy and grace, and that he did not lose his flair for lightsaber combat. I believe Xanatos' time away from the Jedi had him training to become more proficient in lightsaber-to-lightsaber combat. Next to Qui-Gon Jinn, he hated the Jedi Order altogether, always plotting a way to overthrow them. Dedicating himself to an arcane style that most Jedi disregarded runs in line with his sensibilities. On top of that, Count Dooku, Qui-Gon's own master, was a practitioner of Makashi as well, which gives more weight to Xanatos picking up the form. Xanatos was also ambidextrous, switching between both hands in the middle of combat, something we've seen Dooku do as well. Like Dooku, he fought with the unorthodox in mind. However, unlike most users of Makashi, Xanatos packed a punch behind his blows. Much like Ahsoka, Xanatos would also have an ability with hand-to-hand tactics, often chaining in kicks and grabs into his lightsaber moveset. He would also utilize Dun Mach in his battle tactics, often instilling doubt and hesitation in his opponents. During his fight with Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn, he would often break into Obi-Wan's composure. In most cases, Xanatos was a superior strategist to his enemies. Though he held a lot of skill and power, his greatest asset was his mind. During his conflicts with Qui-Gon Jinn, he was often 2 or 3 steps ahead, and even when Qui-Gon caught up to him, he always had a back door. This round is certainly the closest of them all. Dueling was the staple of Ahsoka's and Xanatos' combative diet. They both had masters who had intense focus on lightsaber dueling, and they both took their lessons to heart, adapting their styles but molding them into their own. The differences between them would be minute. They both held an ability with the Taru principles, so neither would shock the other with his focus on mobility. They have both shown experience with the Jar-Kai variant of the form as well, and they both have displayed a competence with hand-to-hand exchanges. The difference between the two would be skill and experience. While Xanatos was very skilled with his blade, employing the concepts of Makashi, Tano was more experienced, fighting and surviving the Clone Wars. But Tano was a bit headstrong in her actions. Granted, Xanatos was as well, often becoming overconfident. But Xanatos could apply Dun Mach tactics against Tano, tipping the edge in his favor. Not to mention, Xanatos was a strategist first and foremost, so it's clear his skill advantage paired with his wit would give him an edge. But one should never discount wartime experience. Yes, Xanatos did take on Qui-Gon Jinn near his prime, along with a young Obi-Wan Kenobi with relative ease, but Tano has faced a multitude of lightsaber-wielding opponents. Therefore, instead of a definitive edge, I give only a slight edge to Xanatos as a lightsaber duelist, though really, this could almost be a tie. A fight between the Jaded apprentice and the fallen knight would be a simple clash of the lightsabers. It would be a battle much like Anakin versus Obi-Wan, very little use of the Force, but a lot of blade work working around one another. Tano gets a slight edge for her spatial awareness, but Xanatos gets an edge for his Force potential. They both nearly match each other when it comes to their dueling abilities, with Ahsoka getting an edge for experience, while Xanatos gets the skill advantage. Let's set up this fight. Let's say it takes place in the Jedi sparring arena. Tano has chased Xanatos into a corner after discovering his intrusion in the temple. She runs into the center of the sparring arena, but does not sense Xanatos' Force signature. Xanatos would certainly be putting his Force cloak to use, revving up an attack for Tano. He will leap from the shadows, ready to pierce the young Padawan through the back, but Tano's Montrals will help her feel the Dark Jedi's cloak on her back. She turns, igniting her 2 lightsabers just in time. She slashes with her Shoto, but Xanatos flips away. Ahsoka would press the attack, using the flamboyant movements of Ataru to break through Xanatos' defense. But the Dark Jedi seems to anticipate her every movement, familiar with her style. He begins pressing the attack back at Ahsoka, pounding at the weak defense of her Jar-Kai style. The power of Xanatos' strikes sends shockwaves through Tano's arms, nearly disarming her of her Shoto. but she notices that Xanatos is throwing too much weight into his strikes. With a slight variation in her defensive posture, Ahsoka dodges Xanatos' strike instead of meeting it head-on, throwing the Dark Jedi off balance. With an opening, Ahsoka would kick Xanatos' open flank, sending him tumbling over. Xanatos would be unfazed. He would probably even compliment Ahsoka on her attack, but then spit an insult at her use of Ataru and how familiar he was with the form, using Dune Mach to bring her down a peg. It works enough to send Ahsoka running after him. They clash blades again. This time Xanatos fights more conservatively, adapting the concepts of Makashi. With a flick of his wrist, he is able to disarm the young padawan of her Shoto. Ahsoka flips away and throws out a force push. The Dark Jedi anticipates the attack, throwing out a force push of his own. But Xanatos has the upper hand, throwing Ahsoka back. Tano falls on her back as Xanatos jumps with his blade overhead. At the last moment, she rolls away, Xanatos' lightsaber sizzling in the marble floor where her heart had been. They re-engage in battle. Xanatos is pressing Ahsoka, but she is holding on, deflecting and dodging what she could. But eventually, Xanatos uses his fencing principles to nick her thigh and wrist. Ahsoka drops her lightsaber, defeated. Xanatos raises his crimson blade once more, striking down with a killing blow. And thus, I deem Xanatos, the fallen Jedi apprentice, the Dark Jedi, the victor. Of course, this is all my opinion. Please leave your thoughts and comments below. Do you think Tano could have found a way to penetrate Xanatos? Or do you agree that the victory lies with Qui-Gon's fallen apprentice? Let me know. Discussion is always my favorite part. Peace, love, and may the Force be with you. Always. Even though Maul did have some skill in his use of combative force powers, his over-specialization in physical combat would hamper his efforts against Malgus' variety and power in the Force. No, why are you mowing your lawn right now? I'm recording a Let's Play.